This presentation by Zach Huntington from Clean Virginia Waterways is from the 7th Annual Clean Virginia Waterways Stormwater and Plastic Pollution Workshop.
Our sole focus at Clean Virginia Waterways is on the solutions and sources to plastic pollution. We're also the Virginia affiliate of the Ocean Conservancy. As we see it, solving the plastic pollution crisis will require a multifaceted approach. There needs to be less single-use plastic produced. About 40% of all of the plastic produced is intended for single use. That's things like food wrappers and bottled drinks, implementation of proven policies to reduce plastic pollution, increased funding to remove plastic pollution that's already reached the environment, also increased and improved infrastructure to handle the waste that we're generating. We have some great presentations today covering all of these topics from the folks who are doing the work to make it happen. One of our roles in this space is to provide unbiased plastic pollution research at a time when a significant amount of the research on the topic is funded by the exact industry responsible for the pollution itself. We believe our reputation for high quality products and our passion for evidence-based policy recommendations can empower change makers who want to solve our most important environmental challenges. We focus on plastic waste because it's a growing and pressing issue. It's evident after 50 years of community cleanups, we won't be able to clean up our way out of this problem. While cleanups of Virginia's communities, waterways, and agricultural fields will remain necessary, the real work will be in reducing the amount of single-use plastic that's produced. For some context, in 1950, there were less than 2 million pounds of plastic produced. In 2022, over 450 million tons was produced. And industry predictions show production is expected to increase to over 1,100 million tons in the next 25 years. Our work is guided by the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan, which we authored along with the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. And this plan is a statewide roadmap for nonprofits, government agencies, regional partners, researchers, and industry as we work together to find sustained approaches to reducing the flow of plastic trash and other trash items into our coastal waterways. Now, due to the complexity of marine debris issues, many stakeholders can play an important role in implementation of this plan. That includes private citizens, government agencies, and NGOs. Execution of the plan will reinforce multi-agency efforts within state government to reduce litter and marine debris, while also increasing the health of Virginia's waterways. And the Virginia General Assembly and other policymakers also have a role in this plan because laws and policies are part of the solution to marine debris. And this plan is broken down into 4 goals. It's to understand, prevent, and mitigate the impacts of consumer debris and single-use plastics. This is the graph that I was supposed to show before. So it's less than 2 million pounds produced in 1950, and the graph just keeps going up. Here is the graph I was speaking about before with plastic production in an incremental rise. So the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan is separated into 4 categories or 4 goals. It's to prevent, understand, and mitigate the impacts of consumer debris and single-use plastics, prevent, understand, and mitigate the impacts of derelict fishing gear in aquaculture, prevent, understand, and mitigate the impacts of microplastics and microfibers, and prevent and mitigate the impact of abandoned and derelict vessels. We're a slight technical difficulty. We are getting it settled.
Well, they're working on this. First of all, I'm Katie Register. I'm Director of Research for Clean Virginia Waterways, and I'm running the virtual part of this workshop. But I wanted to point out that the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan is downloadable from the Clean Virginia Waterways website. And also, those of you in the room in person, there's 5 or 6 copies that you can take a look at. But we have a publication page with this and other publications over the years.
Thank you, Katie. So all of these goals have the same strategies, and these goals and strategies are broken down into 60 actions, which are discrete projects and activities that support an objective undertaken to achieve the associated strategy and goal. These specific one and multi-year steps are needed to advance or complete each objective by the conclusion of the plan. Some of these actions will build popular and political support for laws and policies that will reduce marine debris, and many of the actions in this plan will encourage the creation of green jobs. Now, the goal of our research at Clean Virginia Waterways is to build upon itself. Next slide, please. At Clean Virginia Waterways, we specialize in utilizing data to identify the most prevalent types and sources of plastic ocean pollution, as well as identifying nationwide best practices to develop strategies targeted at reducing the broader plastic pollution crisis. The Ocean Conservancy's International Coastal Cleanup is an annual worldwide cleanup that's hosted every year with millions of volunteers from around the globe. In the last 36 years, over 340 million pounds of trash have been removed from the world's waterways. And for the last 30 years, we've organized the ICC in Virginia. The ICC not only asks volunteers to pick up the trash that they're finding, but also to record the types and amounts of debris that they're removing. Volunteers can either use a paper data form that you see on the screen here, or they can use an app on their phone called CleanSwell. 2023 was the 29th year we've organized the ICC in Virginia. Cleanups are held between August 1st and December 31st every year. Most of the cleanups are in October and September. And more than 131,000 Virginians have taken part in the ICC in the last 30 years. And this annual event not only cleans our waterways, it also collects valuable data about trash and litter in our waterways. Data gives us a baseline and allows us to see trends over time, which is critical information for us as we develop solutions. Organized cleanups can be used for a variety of projects. It can be used to help a neighborhood, shopping center, or business reduce the flow of litter that's leaving their property. It can help a locality update ordinances and codes. It also helps localities understand the effectiveness of the policies that they've put in place. Data can be used to develop litter profiles and help determine solutions that will reduce litter and marine debris. And the data from the ICC is logged into the CleanSwell app. And from there, anyone is able to see it and see data from across the globe, from Virginia, all the way down to their own locality. And next slide, please. So using data provided by the Ocean Conservancy's TIDES database, we have easy access to a detailed list of the most common items found during community cleanups. And this list remains largely unchanged every year. And we see things like cigarette butts, food wrappers, beverage container litter. Most of the things are made of plastic, and most of the things are some sort of consumer debris. And with that list, we can develop strategies and solutions that will target specific problems. And our work is frequently used by governor-appointed work groups, most recently the Plastic Waste Prevention Advisory Council and the Waste Diversion and Recycling Task Force. We put the data to work to find answers and solutions. Data is used by groups across Virginia as they develop education and outreach campaigns, as well as policies and laws. Next slide, please. Now that we really understand the most common items found as plastic pollution, we wanted to know how individuals perceive plastic pollution and what kind of policies they'll support going forward. And this aligned with one of the near-term goals of the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan, which is to measure public support for new laws and policies that will reduce sources of marine debris. Survey will also gather data on attitudes, trusted messengers, and information that will assist in crafting successful behavior change campaigns. So with that directive in mind and funding and program support from the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program, we worked with OpinionWorks to develop a survey of registered Virginia voters. We surveyed over 900 registered voters in Virginia to get their perception on plastic pollution, what policies they would support in the future. We got some really surprising and encouraging information. Next slide, please. And this survey is a representative sample of Virginia voters. There were 901 surveys in the data set. And this gives us a margin of sampling error of plus or minus 3.3. And it's a mixed mode sample. So that means folks aren't just sampled by phone. There was a mixture of online and telephone sampling. And that also included landlines. By using these multiple means, OpinionWorks is able to put together a blended population sample, which does a really good job of capturing all corners of the electorate. Additionally, there were 10 in-depth interviews conducted with participants in May of 2022 that provided some great insight as well. Next slide, please. And we wanted to understand how people are thinking about plastic pollution and how it compares to other issues expressed by Virginia voters. So the first thing OpinionWorks did was ask them to rate a whole series of questions, including non-environmental issues. And you can see right up there at the top, this was the spring of 2022. Inflation was the #1 concern. Not very surprising, but right underneath that is plastic floating in the ocean and plastics and toxins contaminating human food. 87% of Virginians said that plastic floating in the ocean was a somewhat serious or a very serious concern to them. And you can see how that compares to other things we asked them about, right? 73% concerned about climate change, 73% concerned about a lack of good paying jobs. Now, an interesting takeaway here is down at the bottom, you can see trash and litter in your community is only at 61%. And I think that tells us that we can do a better job of our outreach to explain to folks where all this debris is coming from. We know that somewhere between 60 and 80% of all marine debris is generated from land-based sources. Next slide, please. You'll have to hit it twice. Thank you. We also wanted to learn the most effective way to communicate marine debris issues. I'm a marine debris researcher, so this was really important for me to hear. The term marine debris just doesn't resonate with the general public. Plastic ocean pollution is the preferred term. So you've heard me try to force myself to say that a few times. Next slide. So our 10 in-depth interviews were really important information to help us develop how we speak about this and identify gaps in our outreach and education. So Taylor, who you can see here on the screen, was actually the only person in those surveys who had any idea where plastics come from, and they knew they were made from chemicals. So with that information, every presentation I give and everything I write has to include the statement, plastics are made with fossil fuels. They have a lasting impact on human and environmental health for the entirety of their life cycle. And this encompasses extraction of natural gas and oil, transportation through pipelines and on trains, the manufacturing process, turning them into bottles or other plastic products, and concluding with their ultimate resting place, whether it's in the environment, a landfill, or a recycling center. Next slide, please. And this is a high-level overview of the policies that registered Virginia voters support. And these policies supported by Virginians have identified achievable goals for organizations across Virginia as we work to implement solutions to plastic ocean pollution. These policies have broad bipartisan support, and you can read the entire 285-page report or an 8-page summary on our website. And there's also a copy of the 8-page summary going around the room right now. Next slide, please. So now that we know what kind of policies registered voters in Virginia support, we had a question we wanted to answer. How much is industry spending, industry being producers and distributors of frequently littered products, how much are they spending to solve the plastic pollution crisis here in Virginia? And how do we compare to other states? So last summer, we published an in-depth report on Virginia's Litter Control and Recycling Fund, as well as a comparative analysis of how Virginia stacks up to other states. Some background on litter taxes. They were first implemented in the 1970s as industry's response to container deposit legislation, also known as bottle bill or recycling refund. Litter taxes and fees are a valuable tool to remove litter, to fund litter removal once it's reached the environment. Litter taxes fund valuable programs, like litter prevention programs, community cleanups, youth education, solid waste infrastructure, and a bunch of other really valuable programs. But they're just one piece of the multifaceted approach that's necessary to solve the plastic pollution crisis. Litter taxes and associated programs cannot replace the necessary work of implementing solutions to reduce plastic pollution, such as a bottle bill and extended producer responsibility programs. In Virginia, the litter tax is paid at a rate of $20 annually, with some facilities paying an additional $30 tax. And this tax is 1/3 of the funding mechanism for the Virginia Litter Control and Recycling Fund. The rest of it, the other two parts of it are an excise tax on soft drinks and a 2% of the beer and wine cooler excise tax. And next slide, please. So we've seen this graph before, but it really helps illustrate the problem. The star on the graph there is when Virginia's litter tax was first implemented. And since that time, Virginia's population has grown by over 3 million people, and single-use plastics have become ubiquitous. Now, again, 40% of all plastic produced is for the purpose of single use. Virginia is still struggling to handle plastic pollution despite innovative programs from across the Commonwealth. And the Virginia litter tax is a critical aspect of the above all and all hands on deck approach necessary to solve the plastic pollution crisis. The most successful litter reduction programs are supported by policies that stop plastic pollution at its source. Again, I'll mention that plastic production is predicted to increase to over 1,100 million tons by 2050. And next slide, please. Now, how does Virginia compare? Well, how these taxes and fees are implemented and collected vary pretty widely among states and localities that have these programs. Other states and localities have crafted policies that generate significantly more funding for critical programs than Virginia has, often with fewer residents. This table is a per capita breakdown of litter taxes for states and localities in the United States. You can see Virginia down there at the bottom at 33 cents per resident. This is one of the most glaring issues that we found. Virginia's Litter Control and Recycling Fund generates the lowest revenue per capita of any state with a similar policy. But there are some lessons that we can learn from other states to improve Virginia's Litter Control and Recycling Fund. Next slide, please. Using best practices from states and localities from around the United States, we've identified potential opportunities to improve Virginia's Litter Control and Recycling Fund. Most obvious being tie the Virginia litter tax to inflation and adjust it every 5 years. Next slide, please. The research into Virginia's litter fund brought up another question for us. What's the financial impact of plastic pollution here in Virginia? To begin understanding that, we underwent a comprehensive literature review, and we used the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan as our guide for this research. So this literature review is the beginning to completing action 1.2.12, and we're taking this action with a two-phase approach that begins with a literature review. And for this review, we worked with Dr. Clower at the Center for Regional Analysis at George Mason. They came highly recommended to us by the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. And this literature review and research is funded through a grant from the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program and NOAA. Next slide, please. The goal of this initial literature review is to assess the existing body of knowledge about the economic impact of plastic pollution and determine what research methods have been used to understand these consequences. This review serves as an overview of available resources regarding the economic impact of plastic pollution, while also guiding further research on this subject. So we started our literature review with two broad categories. They're the cleanup cost associated with consumer debris and cost avoidance, which is preventing debris from making its way into the environment. Next slide, please. So some takeaways and shortcomings that we found. We didn't find any research for this issue specifically about inland lakes, rivers, and inland waterways, aside from the Great Lakes. And despite consumer debris making up a bulk of plastic pollution, peer-reviewed articles limited to or focused on consumer debris are pretty scarce. Next slide, please. And a significant limitation of the existing research is the interaction between the volume, life cycle, and chemical changes in plastic debris due to climate change, because it has been observed that marine litter and climate change synergistically worsens the impact of either when acting alone. And next slide, please. The phase 2 of this research is really exciting. We're completing a cost analysis study to determine the financial impact of plastic pollution on Virginia's taxpayers. looking at the state government, local governments. So we realize we won't be able to capture a complete financial breakdown of the impact of plastic pollution in Virginia. So we're really focused on the burden that taxpayers are faced. So we're looking at things like community and waterway and beach cleanups, street sweeping, installation of stormwater capture devices, storm drain cleaning and maintenance, manual cleanup of litter, and public education programs that are being dedicated to this issue. And that research is scheduled to be published this fall. In the coming weeks, we're going to publish an update to our 2020 report on container deposit legislation. This research is an in-depth study on the various container deposit legislation around the United States and what kind of positive benefits a bottle bill could bring to us here in Virginia. As we found in 2020, states with bottle bills have significantly less beverage container litter found during community and waterway cleanups. In Virginia, we're a state without a bottle bill. About 17% of all litter collected in the 2022 ICC was beverage container litter. In contrast to states with a bottle bill, at the 2022 ICC, beverage container litter accounted for about 8.17% of the total debris recorded, and we have that scheduled to come out in just a few weeks. And all of our research is available on the Clean Virginia Waterways publication page. You can see all of our reports. You can download the entire Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today, and I'm so excited to hear from the rest of our presenters. And we have a couple minutes if anyone has any questions in the room.
How accurate do you think the Clean Swell app is? We've been using it with our volunteers on Langley and stuff.
Awesome.
There's sometimes where I think they will just go increase their stuff. And we also during cleanups, I know there's even many in the area where they say we want to pick up weight rather than objects. So how do you get, we're trying to get away from that, but that's one of the main things is how much does your bag weigh? So someone can pick up a tire.
Right. Yeah. So
it's great that everyone's picking up stuff. I was saying the accuracy of the Clean Swell app, I don't know anything if it's going to be.
Yeah, that's a fair question. So the weight issue is.
Zach, could you repeat the question for those of us on Zoom, please?
So the question was the accuracy of the Clean Swell app. So it was noted that people have been seen not necessarily inputting the data correctly, and then a question about weight, because a lot of people are interested in weight of cleanups. If you go out and you collect 15 bags of plastic bottles, the weight isn't going to be very impressive, but you're going to have hundreds of plastic bottles. So the actual number of items is a more accurate representation of what we're finding. We trust the Clean Swell data because it lines up with long-term marine debris monitoring that's been done in Virginia and across the Mid-Atlantic. So we have monitoring sites on barrier islands in Virginia, and the data there stacks up against the ICC. What we find from that data is the percentage of plastic is about 83% on the barrier island monitoring. On Clean Swell, it's usually like 79 to 82%. So the percentages match up to give us an accurate portrayal of the debris that we're finding. Yeah, we got a question in the back of the room. There's a microphone with a button.
Is it working?
Can you hear the question, Katie?
Yes.
Has there been any research into the back end of all of the plastic collection? I know that I recently read an article talking about how recycling is far from perfect. And I know that China has stopped buying a lot of the stuff. I know that a lot of our recyclables go there. I guess I'm kind of wondering, after it's all collected, has there been any research into how to keep plastic pollution from being just a cycle? From, I know recently in Chesapeake, there was discussion about a lot of articles ending up in landfills and things like that. So has there been any talk or planning or preparation into how to prevent and make sure it's a closed plastic collected, gathered, fully recycled versus plastic gathered, goes to a landfill and then ends up right back where it started?
Yeah. So creating a circular economy around consumer debris is definitely something that we focus on and is definitely a focus through the entire network of folks who are working on these issues. One of the things that we run into with plastic is that it's really hard to actually recycle plastic. So most of it is actually downcycled. Right? So we get a bunch of plastic bottles, and those are shipped to a facility where they're chopped down into pellets. And then those pellets are usually made into things like benches, buckets, or carpets. And then from there, that's typically their end of use life, and they're taken to a landfill. So when we're talking about recycling and downcycling, they're two different issues. The downcycling with plastics, most of the time, you're just extending that linear system rather than actually creating a closed loop. So it is definitely a loaded question. As far as the things that are cleaned up at community cleanups or waterway cleanups, a lot of the plastic is too photodegraded to do anything with, so it has to go to the landfill. When we host cleanups, I know some other folks in the room, when they host cleanups, if there are salvageable, recyclable materials, we get them to a recycling center as opposed to a landfill, but it is not always possible. But a landfill is a preferred ending spot as opposed to the rivers that I fish in. Do we have any questions online, Katie?
Yes, there was one that pertains to the CVW survey of voters in Virginia. Somebody was wondering, do we have regional breakdowns on the data in addition to that statewide summary that you presented?
So we do have some regional breakdowns. The problem with the regional breakdowns is there's not always enough people who were surveyed in that region for the data to be statistically viable. And so if you pull it apart and there's only a handful of folks from that region, then it doesn't give us the same information that the broader study does. But it is definitely something that we have thought about, and we definitely see the value in more targeted regional surveys as well.
Yeah, and I'll add to that we are willing to share, of course, those regional breakdowns with that little star next to the data, that some of these regions didn't have enough participants, as you mentioned. But we're also working with at least one location to replicate the same questions in their own area. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to contact Zach or myself.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. And we are going to get our next presentation set up here. I'll
And
pass
Zach,
it. Yep.
if I could, for some reason, I'm unable to make our next speaker a co-host. So I think you're going to have to do that for Emily.
Okay, will do.
And while Zach is switching over to our next presentation, I would like to introduce our next two speakers. And I know this is weird because I'm just a voice for you here, but our two speakers coming up are both from the County of Fairfax.